Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to a special edition of the Bengal Tiger Podcast. I'm Billy Embody. Thanks for listening. It is the week of LSU's spring game. A lot to go through on our coverage at thebengaltiger.com with Shay Dixon, Matthew Bruni, holding it down on spring football coverage. But I'm going to be joined a little bit later by JD PicKell of On Threes, The Hard Count. He's one of our national analysts on our YouTube channel, so you can check him out there for more of his shows. But we'll talk with JD about LSU, the national landscape, as well as the SEC. But first, guys, before we get into the podcast, I do have to remind you guys about our friend Andy Ludicky at myperfectfranchise.net. Andy is a franchise consultant. He can set you up with the right course for you when it comes to franchises. If you're ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream, or looking for a side hustle while you work your current job, or just want to diversify, build wealth, or leave a legacy for your family, Andy can help because he's a franchise consultant as well as a franchise owner and helps people find franchises that fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time commitment, and more. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. Go to myperfectfranchise.net. You can reach out to Andy Ludicky at 404-973-9901 or email him, Andy, A-N-D-Y, at myperfectfranchise.net. If you're watching on YouTube, there are a lot of testimonials there at myperfectfranchise.net. And you can get that and more there to find out if franchising is the right fit for you. All right, now that that's out of the way, guys, when we talk with JD, we did dive into LSU's offense, LSU's defense, the changes on both sides of the ball as they enter the 2024 season with spring just wrapping up here. A lot of good stuff from JD. But when we do look at LSU's spring game this weekend, 1 o'clock in Baton Rouge in Tiger Stadium, I'm going to be watching for a couple things. And this is the Garrett Nussmeier show now. We saw what he did in the bowl game, the win over Wisconsin, that comeback drive, the game-winning drive, I should say, and the incredible numbers that he put up over the course of that game. But I do want to just keep seeing more and more of Nuss, and not only more and more of Nuss, but Nuss with his new weapons that he's got, C.J. Daniels, Xavier Thomas, guys like that, along with Kyron Lacey and Mason Taylor, and many of the players that are looking to step up as LSU's new-look offense hits the field. I want to see what they look like. I'm very confident in this offensive line with DJ Chester in the middle. They've got a lot of the returners back around him that'll help him settle in quickly. I remember DJ coming out of high school when I went and saw him in Georgia, and he was playing tackle for his high school team. Very athletic, passionate, leader type of player, and I think he's perfect for the center position for LSU. And as we watch this offense go into this new era, as LSU has a new quarterback and new faces at the skill positions, I want to see Garrett just continue to be himself and find a way to take care of the football, and while still being able to push the ball down the field. We know he's got the arm. We know he's got that ability. The spring game will be that first showcase without a guy like Brian Thomas or Malik Neighbors out there. So it is going to be a change, but this is the group that LSU is bringing in this 2024 season. And if they're going to go to Atlanta, they have to be very, very good right away. And doing so with a running back room that is also going to look a little different. I want to see Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams do their thing before Caden Durham gets here this summer. There's a lot to watch for at the quarterback position in particular. But this offense, very, very well orchestrated, organized, all those things with Joe Sloan and this entire offensive staff. You just want to see it continue to come together. There's only so much you can really take from spring games in a way. I mean, like Brian Kelly said earlier this spring, and just talking with some different people that Shay and Matthew had talked about on the podcast earlier this month, they mentioned that, a lot of these defensive players, they see the same stuff day in, day out, so they know when to jump it, when to do this, when to do that. And so that is kind of the test when you go against your own team and you do it day in, day out. Some of these guys just start to pick up on things. But defensively for LSU, it'll be the first extended public look on TV, for this spring game, where LSU's new look defense under Blake Baker is going to get a chance to show what it can do. We know they're going to bring in more talent on the defensive side. We're expecting that. They already have a commitment from a Wisconsin defensive lineman to come in over the summer and join the program. Gio Pays, who's coming in after playing some for the Badgers. But they're going to bring in more, and they need to, because this is still a defense that was one of the worst in college football. And I trust these coaches to make upgrades without a doubt in the coaching, in the just details that Blake Baker brings to the table. I mean, he did more with less at Missouri throughout his time there. But when you look at what LSU has defensively, they have a lot that still needs to be put together and figured out. We know that Harold Perkins is somebody that they're trying to work more and more at the inside linebacker position and really allow him to flourish there. And this will be that first extended look in the public's eye where he'll get that opportunity to show what he can do. And they have really good talent at linebacker. Linebacker is a room that I love the future for LSU. Defensively, up front, they're going to need to continue to address that spot and try to find ways to get guys in good situations. And so we'll get to see some of that. Can Deshaun Womack continue to emerge into a player? Gabe Relaford, the first public look at him after his highly touted career at Evangel. Ahmad Bro from Ruston and Kalaj Cobbins in there after his career at Destrehan. How did those first-year players look in some of their spring action? But when you look at the corner room and the safety room, those rooms have to continue to get better. Guys like Jordan Gilbert coming into the fold are really going to be important. Jair Brown and some of those others, Austin Osbury that transferred in. I really want to see what the pecking order and what the organization is like on the back end, because Corey Raymond and Jake Olson, we know they've got that ability to understand what the floor is for an LSU defensive back. And they have some bodies that really look the part, but making sure they're in the right spots is something that I think Blake Baker, along with Corey Raymond and Jake Olson, are really going to prioritize this spring. And we'll get to see some of that when this group takes the field. And then we'll be able to assess it once it gets to fall camp, what we're hearing in terms of that. They usually lock it down when they do get closer to fall. But it's a group that has a lot of questions. And if they can kind of lock up some of these receivers that LSU has or show some promise in that regard and make some plays, maybe this defense is on its way to moving up the rankings and finding a way to cut some of that production that it allowed opposing offenses to have against it last year. So, look, a lot of optimism in Baton Rouge with some of the changes in the SEC and the changes to this coaching staff on the defensive side in particular that Brian Kelly has put together. That leads to a lot of people thinking that LSU could be in Atlanta when it comes to the 2024 season. J.D. Picell is one of those guys that has LSU firmly in the mix for a spot in the SEC championship. It's now time to go to our interview with J.D. Picell of On3. We hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Bengal Tiger Podcast. Enjoy this interview with J.D. Picell. Welcome back to the Bengal Tiger Podcast. I'm Billy Embody. Pleased to be joined now by On3's own J.D. Picell from our Nashville area headquarters. J.D., thanks so much for jumping on with us today to talk some Tigers.
Yeah, man, thanks for having me on. Exciting times in Baton Rouge, and that year 3 for Brian Kelly seems to be a fun one wherever he's at. So I know the good folks in LSU are excited for this one.
You can catch JD's show, The Hard Count, on3's YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button for the Bengal Tiger YouTube as well as the On3 YouTube channel. JD, let's start with this. Brian Kelly's 2 10-win seasons to lead things off. He's recruiting at a high level right now. What is your national view of what Brian Kelly and this staff is doing in Baton Rouge?
To me, LSU just feels a lot like Thanos, just inevitable. It's kind of the way that, I mean, obviously there's been other head coaches that have won national titles in Baton Rouge before, and I don't know if it'll be this year or if it'll be in 5 years, but I think Brian Kelly bringing back a national title to Baton Rouge, he's the next guy to get that done. And the thing with him too, like, he is as sure a thing there is as a head coach in college football. Everywhere he's been, he's won, and he's done it at a high level. And the good news for everyone that's an LSU fan is year 3, like we said at the opening, is typically one of those big years for him. And we were fortunate enough to have him on the show a couple weeks back, and he didn't shy away from that. He's like, yeah, typically for me, that third season, wherever we're at, like, we get our standard in place, our culture in place, our roster about how we like it. So I mean, this is kind of that time of the year where, coaches try and not make headlines. And so for him to be so bold to say something like that, I thought that said a lot about his confidence and said a lot about where he believes LSU is at moving into 2024.
When you talked with Brian Kelly, what are the things that stand out about him as the leader of this program?
I feel like he is just so refined, having been around college football as long as he has and been at other high-profile destinations. Just so clear the direction for him. And that's not to say everything's perfect or that they're always having every single thing buttoned up exactly how they want it to, but like he knows what it looks like. You know what I mean? Like he's been to a national title game with Notre Dame. He's had multiple 10-win seasons. Like he's been successful at every level. And so I think the fact that he's kind of got that been there, done that to him, not so much in a way that, he's, the game's passed him by at all. I think the exact opposite. Like he knows what a winning culture looks like. He knows what a winning offseason looks like. And so I think all that's to say the way that he retooled things this past offseason, being able to keep Garrett Nussmeier, obviously, before the year was crucial. Going and grabbing a guy like Blake Baker to be your DC was massive. And so I think all the adjustments they've made just kind of further encourage me as a college football fan that LSU is going to be a force as long as he's the head coach there.
You talked about that retooling, and a lot of that will be on display when LSU gets going in its spring game, and then we'll be tracking a lot of the changes defensively into the fall and seeing how that goes. But offensively, we know what's in place from a system perspective. When it comes to Garrett Nussmeier taking over this position from Jaden Daniels, what is the retooling that needs to go on offensively with him at the helm to make sure this unit still operates at that high level?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the obvious part is Jaden Daniels running the football is a one of one. There's not too many people that just are gliding past defenses the way that he did last year. And LSU fans know that, obviously. But I think for me, it's interesting kind of the comparison between the two and maybe how they are a little more naturally the way they lean throwing the football. And what I mean by that is Jaden Daniels, the year prior to this Heisman campaign, people were saying like, hey, can we unhitch the wagon? Can we push the ball vertical a little bit more? Can we have some more explosives? And that was kind of the headline all offseason long going into this season. And then for Garrett Nussmeier, you think maybe he almost lands on the other side of that spectrum where it's like, hey, we know he wants to push it deep. Like, guy has no problem uncorking it and testing out that arm strength. I mean, I called him the gumbo gunslinger. I have no idea if that will catch any traction at all. But if it does, I just would love a little bit of a hat tip, a little bit of credit if that ends up getting some traction. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's very comfortable pushing the ball downfield. And so to be able to rein that in a little bit for him, you almost think that might be easier than having to encourage a quarterback to push it deep. Like, just take what the defense gives you and you'll be in good shape. And much like we saw in that bowl game against Wisconsin, where went for almost 4 bills and a lot of touchdowns and ultimately that game-winning drive. So I think the fact that he's now getting all the 1 reps is going to do a lot of favors for him, and I can't wait to see the final product.
Replacing not only Jaden Daniels, but Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors. You bring back Kyron Lacey. You bring in Xavier Thomas from Mississippi State, CJ Daniels from Liberty. You in particular are very high on CJ Daniels, had 1,000 yards last year for the Flames. Now, the jump in competition is there, but what do you see from CJ Daniels that makes you say this is another one to watch coming out of Baton Rouge?
I mean, such a wide open offense too at Liberty, right? With Caden Salter throwing the ball around. Like, he was such a weapon for them in an offense that people knew he was going to get a fair amount of the targets in that offense. And so I don't have a ton of question marks about him translating to the SEC. And I think the system in itself, with all those weapons you just mentioned, are going to make it difficult for defenses to pay too much attention to just CJ Daniels or Kyron Lacey or anyone else on that receiving corps. So for that reason, I think it's difficult to expect that like that production from a first round pick in Malik Neighbors or a big time prospect in Brian Thomas is going to just be, plug and play, copy and paste. But I think with all of the things you have on paper right now, it's fair to be expectant that offense, shouldn't have a massive step backward like you would typically see when you lose a Heisman Trophy quarterback and a couple of first-round wide receivers.
And defensively, that's the bugaboo for LSU.
Sure,
they
sure.
could have very well won a national championship if they had been able to piece something together on the defensive side of the ball. But instead, they gas everybody on that side. They bring in Blake Baker, Bo Davis, Corey Raymond, Jake Olson. It's a really impressive group of coaches in Baton Rouge now, and Brian Kelly went about that in a very deliberate, methodical way, but it ends up with LSU really retooling the defensive coaching staff at an impressive level. What do you see from that group that they brought in, and what are some of the burning questions you have about what LSU can be on defense this year?
Yeah, Billy, I mean, you probably could attest to this as much as anybody, but it feels like to me that the way Blake Baker wants to coach his defense, kind of be the hammer, not the nail, kind of be the aggressor in a lot of sense, be aggressive. I think they had like a sack rate of 8% last year, which was top 15, maybe even top 10 in the country with that Missouri defense. I feel like that fits the persona of what LSU fans have come to expect from their defenses, kind of this gritty, athletic operation, and they take advantage of that by getting after you. And so when I see, a defense that was as aggressive as they were last year under Blake Baker at Missouri and how often they got after the quarterback, I can't help but put the equation together in my mind. And I'm not a math guy at all, Billy. I'm not a math guy, but I do see the equation of Harold Perkins and his freakish ability to rush the passer paired with the defense that rushes the passer at an elite level. I'm like, okay, hey, we got the chef, we got the ingredients. Like, how are we going to utilize him to be the freak he was as a true freshman? Because as talented as he is, and as much of a true linebacker, I know he's going to probably be asked to be in the NFL to some degree. Like, we got to let Harold Perkins cook a little bit here. Kind of the inverse of Jaden Daniels pushing the ball deep last year. A little bit more from him on that side of the ball. A little more juice. Kind of the same thing from Harold Perkins. A little more juice, a little more oomph, and I think Blake Baker's going to be able to put that in positive positions.
Let me ask you a hypothetical. LSU advances into the SEC championship game if?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think if the LSU defense doesn't take a massive step, I think they need to take marginal steps. If they can be, we talked to Shea Dixon today actually on an On-Three Roundtable episode, and he says if LSU can be like a top 60 defense, which I think is right on the money, that offense I'm expecting will be maybe not as potent as last year, but potent enough to where you can get into shootouts and feel confident. So my direct answer to that question will be if LSU can give up, let's say they give up 24 points a game, and if they score in the range of 38 points a game, I think they're probably an SEC title appearance with those statistics, which is oversimplifying it. I understand that, but that's probably where I would lean as we sit here at the end of March.
This new look SEC, Texas, Oklahoma joining the league in this season. Yeah. And LSU schedule got USC, UCLA. It's a fun year to be in the SEC. Not that it's not, pretty much 90% of the time. But what do you see from this league now that you bring in a Texas and an OU? Do you expect them to take a minute to realize what they're into with the meat grinder that is this league, or do you see them immediately establishing themselves among the best and teams that want to be and should be in Atlanta?
Yeah, I think the fact that Texas brings back a quarterback is absolutely massive. Like, you probably feel a lot better about your chances with Quinn Ewers and how much game he's played, as opposed to throwing the keys to Arch Manning and saying, hey, good luck, go and sail this ship into the monsoon that is the SEC. And that's kind of the situation Oklahoma finds themselves in. I mean, as well as they've recruited, as much as I believe in Brent Venables long-term as a head coach, it's fair to have some question marks around who Jackson Arnold is long-term. And I think they believe in him. Otherwise, you probably don't let Dylan Gabriel walk out the door to Oregon. But I think that all that's to say, Texas probably has more of their feet underneath them moving into the SEC, even with the losses of an Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell and 2 All-American defensive linemen. I think that culture is a little bit more solidified. And I think Oklahoma has a chance in the long run. I think they'll probably be upper middle tier to start the year. But I think both will find themselves as a consistent force in that conference over the course of the next 5 years, if that's not too vague of a term. And then the other part of this is kind of interesting is we have some real question marks around the SEC that if, those questions get answered in the right way, Ole Miss, if that, defensive line is as advertised with what they got through the portal with 2 top 10 players via the portal with Walter Nolan and Princely Umanmielen. And then if we have a Tennessee with Nico Iamaleava, I mean, he was the number 1 player in 2023 overall. Like, if he translates right away, is Tennessee back to their form of 2022? And then you ask questions about A&M and Mike Elko bringing structure to that roster. So that's the fun part, I guess, about spring football right now is there's so many blanks to fill in. And depending on how you fill those in, maybe that changes the script. Regardless, you could look at probably a good 5, 6 teams that wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if they made the college football playoff. And out of a field of 12, that's speaks to the depth, the strength, and the overall just volume of the league and the talent they have.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is not only is Nick Saban out at Alabama, you bring in two wild cards in Texas and Oklahoma. They are eliminating divisions. What do you think that makes how much more difficult does it make getting to Atlanta? Does it change that, or is it just still that same week in, week out, grind of the SEC?
Yeah, I think it's definitely still the week in and week out grind, but I mean, the fact that it now is going to be a Hunger Games style of regular season in the SEC, I think it probably makes it more likely that we're going to see a rematch in Atlanta. And that's not to speak down on anybody's schedule specifically, but like I'm watching that one in Austin early on in the year between Georgia and Texas. I'm watching, Tennessee and Alabama, and I'm not calling my shot here for who's going to end up in the SEC title, but I'm saying there's a much better chance that I think we'll have a round 2 of sorts in Atlanta when we watch that conference title game. But I mean, if I had to pick right now, I would lean very strongly towards an LSU being, if not in that top 2, at least top 3. And I think they'll be in that conversation all the way into that final game before we hit the college football playoff, which is, of course, the conference title weekend. So to answer it directly, it definitely is still the most difficult conference in the country. And the fact that you take away divisions just ups the level of difficulty that much more to find your way to Atlanta.
What makes you, when you look at this SEC again, it's large, just difficult group to navigate. What makes you confident LSU is right in that mix to make it to Atlanta? What are the keys of this team that stand out to you?
I think as we sit here in March, it's tough to know exactly how different teams are going to respond, to adversity and who stays healthy. Like for me, Billy, at this point in the year, I bet on coaches. And I don't know, like I said at the top of this thing, I don't think there's a more sure bet in college football outside of maybe Kirby Smart than Brian Kelly. I mean, there's not going to be a situation he's overwhelmed in. There's not going to be something that arises that he, hasn't dealt with in some form or fashion before. And just the ability to have an even pulse throughout the course of a season and the ability to have, had different year 3s at different programs and had those experiences, I think that just is invaluable. And you can't replicate that unless you've gone through it. And so in that way, I think Brian Kelly running the show, regardless of who's on the roster, regardless of who's new, who's unproven, like as long as he's in charge of the culture, the way of doing things, their operation week in and week out, I'm always going to have confidence if I'm an LSU fan.
All right. Big picture here. Who are some of your playoff contenders? Or I guess now that it's a 12 team, how do we discuss the playoff? Because pretty much the top 25, I guess, is your playoff contenders.
Yeah.
Who's your national championship contenders, I guess, early on?
Yeah.
Do you have any of those nailed down?
Oh yeah. I mean, we're getting the gears going here. We did a post Nick's talking season's in full effect, baby. It's the post Nick Saban, post portal top 12 for us we put together. And that was just like a weird exercise to begin with, because we're so used to doing the top 4, then first 2 out. Hey, also what's going to happen to that rankings reveal? Like that used to be, I think, 30 minutes. How do you get through 12 teams and talk through all those 12 teams and the other contenders in a 30-minute schedule? So maybe we get some more playoff talk during those Tuesday night reveals. I think when it comes to contenders, I look at the obvious of Georgia, Texas, Ohio State. I feel relatively confident you can start to pencil them into, playoff spots, whether it's, conference champions or at large. I'm really high on Ole Miss, as I mentioned before. I think that they've put all their chips in the middle of the table, and I think they're in a spot to really make a run at this thing. I think Oregon with Dylan Gabriel, same way that I love Brian Kelly's experience, I love Dylan Gabriel's experience, now going on his 37th year of college football. You love to see that. It's their different stop, and there's a reason why Oregon went and got him after Bo Nix left, with some talented quarterbacks still on the roster. So, I mean, I think those are probably the early ones that I get excited about. I'm curious about Michigan. They lose a lot. I'm curious about Florida State. They lose a lot. I think the ACC and the Big 12 could end up being the 2 most fascinating conferences in college football. Like, I look across the board in the ACC and like Florida State, new quarterback, 83rd in returning production. Miami, I feel like they're kind of trending upward. If I had to pick a team today to win the conference, I might pick them. Virginia Tech is number 1 in returning production in the entire country, and they finished the year 5-2 in their last 7. Like, Brent Pry's got the boys cooking a little bit out there. Louisville brought in, I think, 177 transfers again through the portal. So, like, there's so many just moving pieces in that conference to where there's no real, I think, surprise. That I could pick 5 different teams, and the same thing with the Big 12 with Utah and K-State and Arizona. Like, it's just there's so much parity that could go on in those conferences. I think that'll be a dogfight. So that's a long way to say I'm watching Miami and Utah and Kansas State to all be some playoff contenders out of those conferences.
Let's take a quick break and we'll wrap up here. You have the hard count.
Yep.
The program's running strong over there. The program. What's it like right now for you, and what's next for the hard count? What can people expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the phenomenal part about this sport is it's started to evolve more and more into a year-round thing. Like, the portal doesn't open for like another couple of weeks, and Caden Proctor's already making an announcement that he's entering, and then more or less announcing he's committing to Alabama when it does open up. So I think that paired with spring football have kind of presented a lot of meat to put on the bone for us when it comes to scheduling out shows. So I think there's that, and I think there's also doing our best to try and take a broad view of the college football landscape. There's the last couple of off seasons now we've had conference realignment news and different things within the rules changing, and now we got the NIL having some movement there. So I think trying to, as best we can, take inventory as to where the sport is at, and then kind of trying to gather a little bit of direction for where we think the sport's heading in 2024. And by the way, keeping tabs on spring ball and the transfer portal. So it's usually, Billy, you could say this as well as anybody. It's, typically a quieter time in college football right before this time of year and leading to this time of the year. But I mean, it seems like it's kind of been full go since confetti dropped in Houston. It's kind of been all systems go, as I'm sure it has been on your end as well.
All right. Last couple questions, and they're quick hitters. And I just wanted to ask, just in case the connection ended, but who you got as SEC champion and who you got as the national champion? This is locking you in here, March 27th, 2024.
Man, yeah. As we sit here in March, a little bit nervous that I will not be welcome within the state of Louisiana, given my answer, because unfortunately I have the same team, and I say unfortunately for good folks listening via the Bengal Tiger. I got Georgia, both as my SEC champion and as my national champion. I feel like they have the best roster. I feel like they got the experience now they needed in the big games at quarterback with Carson Beck. You got the best coach in college football in Kirby Smart. So for that reason, I'll go Georgia, subject to change, but I just feel like they're on a mission this year. And I think Kirby Smart being able to not have to manufacture any chase and not have to manufacture this us against the world mentality. They're still the favorite in Vegas. I understand that, but with them coming into the season, having missed on their goal of winning a national title for the third year in a row last year, it's kind of chalky, but I'm going with Georgia to win the whole thing and win the SEC, Billy.
I mean, tough to argue with that as far as a bet. So I'm sure LSU fans in the comments, though, will be all over us. So we'll be keeping an eye on that one. I mean, it's tough to bet against Georgia, but, LSU has a lot of questions. They've got a first-year starting quarterback. We know Nuss has gotten some experience and a lot of questions on defense. So tough to argue with that. Hey, at least you didn't say Alabama. You'll still have fans in Louisiana. Trust me. I thought you were saying same as last year's SEC champion, and I was like, oh man, we're gonna have to cut this segment.
Yeah. Hey, stick around for August. We may, you never know where we're gonna land when it comes to the preseason prediction. But yeah, right now we're sticking with the Dogs.
Well, awesome. Well, you can find them on the Hard Count on 3's YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button to both the Bengal Tiger YouTube channel as well as on 3's YouTube channel. JD PicKell, thanks so much for joining us on the Bengal Tiger Podcast.
Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate JD for stopping in with us, and be sure to subscribe to thebengaltiger.com for just $1 for your first month. We'll have another edition of the podcast later this week. We will catch you guys then. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you all next time.